In this episode, I traveled to Kathmandu, Nepal, where I met with frequent podcast guest Lama Glenn Mullin, spiritual teacher, Tibetologist, and author of over 30 books on Buddhism. Glenn was in Kathmandu to lead a group of over 50 pilgrims into tantric retreat in the nearby mountains, and graciously agreed to film with me at various sacred sites before and after their retreat. In this video, Glenn and I traveled to Swayambhu Stūpa, a sacred monument venerated by both Buddhists and Hindus alike. First, we circumambulate the base of the hill. Then Glenn is joined by some of his students, and we ascend the hill to the main stupa. Along the way, Glenn explains the history of the site, as well as the symbolism of its architecture, sacred statues, and inscriptions. Glenn also discusses Shaivite and Tantric Buddhist relations and their shared power centers, the three kāyas and the Tulku tradition, and the use of psychoactive substances such as soma in spiritual practice. So without further ado, Lama Glenn Mullin.
For many people, Swayambhu is the most sacred of the Buddhist power places of Nepal. According to the legend, Kathmandu was all underwater, and meditators would meditate on the mountains surrounding the lake. And one of those was a great Buddhist master and Bodhisattva Manjushri. And this mountain here, around which so much is built, was one of the meditation places for Manjushri, the Buddha of wisdom, Bodhisattva of wisdom. According to the legend, Buddha gave his highest wisdom teachings to Manjushri, and these were kept here. Because of course Buddha was not an Indian, not born in India. He was actually born in Nepal. So we could say Arya Desh, the land that became India. So he was born here in Nepal, and Buddhism spread throughout Nepal very early after the Buddha's life and teachings. And later, of course, the Indian king Ashoka, who became an emperor, sent his daughter to Nepal and to Kathmandu, and she built stupas around the valley. But originally this mountain was a meditation mountain, and when Buddha gave his wisdom teachings, the Bodhisattva Manjushri brought them back here. And here they stayed for some hundreds of years until Nagarjuna picked them up and basically widely popularized them or spread those teachings, that aspect of Buddhist teaching throughout the Buddhist world. Now, Nagarjuna is often known as father of the Mahayana, because those wisdom teachings became the basis for the great way to enlightenment, as it's called. So, in ancient times, there was a stupa on top of this little mountain, and later, after the water drained away and it became a mandala city surrounded by a ring of mountains, you could say, the little stupa on the top of the mountain became replaced by a great stupa, and we'll visit that later after going around the whole mountain. It's about between a 3 and a 5 kilometer walk to circumambulate the entire mountain. 30 years ago or 40 years ago, when I first came here, this walkway wasn't built up around the mountain. People would just walk. But as with the Tibetan refugees coming out and the sort of great surge of Dharma energy, enlightenment energy that Tibetans carry with them wherever they go, all of those regions of North Nepal, which border Tibet and have been Tibetan Buddhists since time immemorial, started looking to Kathmandu and the Tibetan refugee communities down here for their training and study and so forth, and the Tibetan replica monasteries and the refugee camps of Nepal and India and so forth, Ladakh. And as such, the exodus of Tibetans from Tibet following Chinese invasion saw a great resurgence of building activity in Nepal, throughout all of India. And this is one example. So every little area, there's probably about 30 or 40 kingdoms across the north of Nepal, which are all Tibetan Buddhists. They use Tibetan language in their Dharma practices and in their spiritual life. And they have little Buddhist temples in the Tibetan style of Vajrayana. And when this started to get permission from the government to build it up, different groups from there were given 100 meters here, 100 meters there, to build a sort of a stupa or a little chapel or temple in honor of their specific little Himalayan kingdom history or style of continued Buddhist practice for the last 2,000 years. So as we go around, we'll see many of these mentioned. So very often on these we'll have a plaque like this, written in Nepali and then written in Hindi and then written either in Tibetan or English. And here is English. Financed by Purpa and Chine Dorje of Manang. So Manang is an old Buddhist kingdom here in Nepal. There's a lot of Buddhists we see in Bodhi and out here in the Stūpa area are from that little kingdom known as Manang. And as it says here, it was financed by a particular family from that group, so it represents their heritage. Lola so, ya português. Que não se chale mampo do. Soma so gidoa. Lola so. So this is the official Keep Our Sacred Sites Neat and Tidy Brigade. Canada na yung bayin. Re. Yiniyang nga chang sa gya masons. De la Pumochik chang sa gya ba la yung bayin. Kirang kyoka yorebe. Tening en the Canada lepe. Canada pega. Te yabado. Bopelo so cache. Kemani chang sa gya ba shogereyo. Marebe. Mare chik ba thamani. Yore. No lesa. To the che akatin che. Kar shudin che. Akka samul. Oh, kegin. Ducha. I was teasing the young ladies. I said, I'm from Canada. I've never been married. I'm here seeking a wife. Will you come with me to Canada? And two of them said, yeah. Of course, joking, right? You know, I'm teasing. And then I said, well, I understand that some parts of Tibet and Himalayas you can have two wives. So will you both marry me and come to Canada? And one said no, and the other said, yes, we have that tradition. Tibetans, one of my lamas once said, according to ancient legends, Tibetans are descended from the union of a monkey and an abominable snow lady. And they fell in love and made 6 babies. And from those 6 babies came the 6 tribes of 6 clans of early Tibet, or 6 nations. And the Lama said, one reason why Tibetans are so mischievous and playful is they're descended from the monkeys. And you can see it with like that sort of little connection or conversation. Tibetans are always very playful. They love to laugh and so on. So this is another Manang, Tinle Manang. So, and this is a Namgyal Stūpa. Tashe dele, namaste, soma. So I think the Manang people, there's another group called Tamang, the horsemen. That's another kingdom. And Ta, his horse, and Mang means many horsemen. But they were famous horse breeders and horse enthusiasts. And a lot of the people around this who moved down from the mountains and settled around the stupa are from Tamang as well. There was a very big influx of population 15 or 20 years ago when there was a bit of a Maoist mountain guerrilla force. And at that time it became very dangerous in the countryside. And many people say that sort of militant movement was financed by a radical wing of the Indian government to try and make Nepal invite India to come in and help out as a way of kind of taking over Nepal. But at that time, the Maoists in the countryside were quite dangerous, and they'd come into villages with their machine guns. Namaste, Banaji. Yeah. They come into the villages with the machine guns and shoot whatever police were there, because the police in Nepal didn't carry guns, just lathi sticks. And then shoot a few school teachers, then grab some teenagers for the Maoist army. And so at that time, a lot of the mountain regions became dangerous living. So we had over 1 million immigrants into Kathmandu Valley at that time. It was the only safe place to be if you had teenagers as kids. And then after the king, I guess that Maoist movement went on for about 10 years, and eventually they agreed to a political solution and opened a kind of political party. They didn't have a lot of demands. One was that they changed the name of the Royal Nepal Airlines to Nepal Airlines. And the other was the traditional king's palace should be turned into a museum. And of course they wanted some political power in the government, which they got. And that ended the violent side of the Maoist movement here. But with so many, Kiram Korala Gyobo Pegido, Sunam Gyobo Sagido. So again, when we come to another little image, it'll say who was the sponsor of it. And again, as we go around the different areas of northern Nepal with different Buddhist movements, And so we see quite a few Guru Rinpoches and Milarepas. And this is Lama Tsongkhapa, the founder of the Dalai Lama school of Buddhism, you could say. And it would be built by one of those regions in which the Gyanden Chulug was strong. The lineages coming from him was strong. Om Mani Mani Mama. So basically this side starts with the 8 Great Stūpas. And from the time of Buddha, when he was going to pass away, he announced his passing 3 months or so before, and told people if they wanted to be present, they should meet him in Kushinagar. And then during his life, he taught in 8 main kingdoms. So he commanded that the relics from his funeral pyre should be divided equally between them. And each of those 8 Great Stūpas commemorates, you could say, an epiphany on the path to enlightenment. So they're really sort of 8 celebrations, 8 sort of faces of enlightenment, or celebration of the enlightenment experience. And from that time on, they traveled throughout much of the Buddhist world, and Tibet loved making sets of the 8 Great Stūpas. And here, I'm sure there's different Himalayan groups got together and said, who would like the Namgyal, the All Victoria Stūpa, and who would like, and so on, for the 8 kinds of stupas. The favorite mantra for Tibetans, Om Mani Padme Hum, and then Om Vagishani Mu, which is Manjushri, and Om Vajrapani Hum. So compassion, wisdom, and power, the 3 main qualities required to become a good human being. And of course, not only a conventionally good human being, but as compassion grows, wisdom grows, and inner courage or power grows, one goes from ordinariness to a living Buddha, such as the aspiration. So Om Mani Padme Hum, compassion. Om Vagishari Mam, the wisdom. Om Vajrapani Hum, the Vajrapani mantra for power. Himalayans love every morning to do a songchok, an offering of fragrant smokes. And it's known as song in Tibetan. And every pilgrimage place has numerous, you could say, smoke offering kilns, and people coming around will offer a little bit in each one. So this is, for instance, a little kiln. Someone has left the end of their incense box here, and we can see the smoke offering has finished, but someone else will relight it in a little bit. Every 100 yards or so, there's a small smoke offering kiln. Namkha Norbu, one of the Tibetan lamas to popularize Dzogchen in the West, commented that songchok, the morning smoke offering ritual, is pre-Buddhist in Tibet, coming from the old shamanic traditions. Most Tibetan households across the high mountains, when they wake up in the morning, they put on a fire for tea and breakfast if they're having, and they'll take some coals from the fire and a little fire pot, and they'll go outside. Nepal, on the sacred Buddhist places, they love planting Bodhi seed trees, or Bodhi trees, which is the main benefit of it is it casts wonderful shade and has great meditative energy. So in India, being a hot country, during the day, people would often meditate under the Bodhi tree, or a Bodhi tree. And we call it the people tree, but Bodhi means enlightenment. It's kind of a nickname, if you will.
So I read that the stupa is also venerated by Shaivites.
Well, basically, Indian traditions tend to be quite universal. The idea of exclusivity doesn't really apply to many Asian traditions. It's rare to find a Taoist who thinks they have some sort of inside line on truth, enlightenment, spirituality. So Shaivism really comes from a pre-Buddhist Ishvara tradition, Maoist. And so you could say, in a way, that ancient tradition took some different forms as it spread through the 400 countries that made up ancient India, and picked up various distinguishing characteristics in places where it went. But basically, all Himalayan power centers are shared by many different traditions. So, for instance, near Bodhi, we have the Pashupatinath temple, which is very, very big for Ishvara and for Shaivism. Every November, all of the great Shiva Babas from all over India gather, and they smoke hashish chillums in huge groups of sadhus, monks. When I first came to India, there were 13 million hashish smoking Shiva Babas, or as they were often called, or Nat Babas is another name for them. And for them, it's a holy sacrament. And traditionally in autumn, they all come to the Himalayas, because that's where Shiva, seeing that enlightenment might be difficult in modern times, sprinkled some stardust, and it came up as the plant from which charas is made. So the main difference between Buddhists and Shiva Babas is the Shiva Babas smoke quite strongly charas as part of their sacrament. Sort of like in, I don't know, Hopi Indians take peyote, and in the Amazonian natives take ayahuasca. In Canada, our natives often use magic mushrooms. So they use in that way. But Buddhists generally don't use many materials, because there's a saying, there's 5 ways to generate clairvoyant power and deeper wisdom. And the best is meditation, and second best is dream yoga, and learning to practice yoga in your dreams. And the third is Ze, substances. So that's like Olympic gold, silver, and bronze. And, you know, certainly some Buddhists do use sacraments, there's no question, and especially in remote village places. The Lama whom the Dalai Lama appointed to teach us in Dharamsala, when he opened the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives with his Buddhist Studies Department, he was from Eastern Tibet. And he said in his part of eastern Tibet, a lot of the Loba, sort of more shamanic pre-Buddhist, so it's not Bönpo, they call them Loba, and they would use datura, which Tibetans call sirche, the gold maker, because when you run it, everything looks golden. And of course the Shiva people also use datura. But in the Buddhist tradition, because it's often said meditation produces the most stable form of wisdom, and next is dream yoga. Seeing as how we're awake 2/3 of the day, we can meditate, and we're asleep 1/3 of the day, and we can practice dream yoga. Then using substances isn't that common or that popular. And I think in Tibet it also wasn't very practical in the high, dry climate and what have you. So it's not very common. But nonetheless, all of the power places throughout the Himalayas are shared by many, many traditions. And for the Buddhists, then it's the Swayambhu is the mountain where Manjusri imparted the Rajnaparamita Suttas to Nagarjuna, and where many great Indian masters came to meditate, especially the Bengali masters, because we're very close to Bengal. You just basically go east a little bit and head south, and you're in the Bengal territories. You can get to Darjeeling, West Bengal, in an overnight bus, for example. So, yeah, those Bengali traditions came up here, and I think, Jewish people were the chosen people, and Christians were the saved, and then the Muslims were the saviors, and that three Semitic religions sort of have that idea of exclusivity on some level of truth or reality, but it doesn't exist much at all in Asia, certainly not in the Indian subcontinent, coming up through the Himalayas to Tibet. I mean, of course, everyone's proud of unique, they call it in Tibetan, kechu, special features of their own tradition. If you're a Kargyupa, you like talking about some great exploits of previous Kargyu masters. If you're Nyingma, some liberation stories of previous Nyingma lamas, and Sakya, Kadampa, Ralug, Shalu traditions. They like the Jonangpas, and of course, Gelugpa's Dalai Lama school. They're proud of their heritage and love the stories of great masters who achieved enlightenment, but very few of them think that this is exclusive to their own school. And for that reason, the sharing of sacred sites is very common. And had you not been so busy, Steve, with this medicine stuff, when you came to Maratika with us, in the Maratika cave where Guru Rinpoche spent some time, half of it is used by the Shiva Baba for an Ishvara tradition, giving red dots to everyone who comes through as a blessing. And the other half is used by Buddhist monks, because Guru Rinpoche was there. I shouldn't say monks, Buddhist practitioners. So it's very common throughout Central Asia.
What do you think of the ideas that sometimes one hears that those sorts of substances, Dutsi, Amrita and so on, were used in the Mahasiddha times much more commonly by the Mahasiddhas, that it's a sort of something that was done in those tantric Buddhist traditions and fell out of use? What do you think of that idea?
I think there's no question that with the places being shared and in non-monastic manners, non-monastics would certainly sit around fires with Shiva Babas in the evening, and no doubt if chillums came out or soma was being passed around, in all probability it was shared, because sharing is a natural part of human communication. And in Mongolia, when a Mongolian offers you vodka, you say, "I don't drink." He'll say, "You don't like me or you don't like my vodka?" Similarly, when Gampopa came to Milarepa, Milarepa offered him a skull cup with chung, and he said, "I'm a monk, I shouldn't drink alcohol." So Milarepa said, "Well, if you're with me, then I'm offering you chung, so you indeed should drink it." Yeah. And if you want to know how much weight you've lost eating rice and lentils as the only food in Nepal, the most common food, for 10 cents you can. Of course, when we come around to the back, Negi Gampa. Up at the top we've got some, I'm not sure, I think it's a nunnery, but anyway, either male or female monastery at the top overlooking the stupa. I believe it was built either by Ergyun Tulku or by one of his 6 sons. And all of his 6 sons, 4 of them, he gave Tulku names, and they've become quite successful international Dharma teachers and building monasteries in various places and retreat centers. One of them, Sogni Tulku, I think he's got 2 or 3 nunneries each with some hundreds of nuns that he supports. So they're doing very wonderful work.
I've heard Mingyur Rinpoche's name associated with...
Yeah, that's one of the 4 sons who was given the Tulku name by his dad and has been very well received, teaching Dharma around the world. I think he's starting a 30-day teaching or something, or 3 months perhaps, I can't remember. Very soon, some of the members of our retreat, after our retreat, they're joining that teaching session.
Do you know what it's going to be about?
No, I didn't ask. Being in retreat, I'm supposed to, during retreat, I'm supposed to keep one's mind on the retreat. So these kind of stupas, one can go in and circumambulate the whole little building. Oh, money, money, mama. Oh, money, money, mama. Oh, money, money. Maha money. The Tibetans love cutting mantras and dharanis, even complete sutras and tantras, into shale. There's a stupa in Tibet where they did the whole Kenjar, all the 108 volumes. Means thousands of pages of books, each on a rock like that, and then they stack them, next one stack, and make the whole stupa. You can't take them out and read them because they're all become part of the structure. Oh, money, 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 money. Oh, money. So many locals, they do this kora, I don't know, 3 to 5 kilometers, depending on what little shortcuts you will take. If you have to get to work earlier, you started late or something, every day. Once in America, in Canada, I asked an immigrant Tibetan, what do you miss most? He said, morning and evening kora. It's such a wonderful way to get a beautiful walk, and at the same time you're practicing mantras and meditation. And of course you're meeting your friends, pilgrims staggering on the drunken path together to enlightenment. And it's unfortunate they put up these buildings because right behind here is the main Bönpo Monastery in Nepal. And that's where a lot of people would go to do the 49-day dark retreat. But it's become even darker with cutting out the sun from the buildings going up in front of it. So again, each of these will have an individual sponsor. With these 3 statues, the verse in Tibetan says, Dharmakaya, the formless aspect of enlightenment, manifests as Amitabha, Buddha of boundless light. For something to have form, the light needs boundaries. So boundless light means this infinite radiance. So in the middle we see Amitabha, Buddha of boundless light. And then it goes on to say, Sambhogakaya, Shenrazi, have a look at Ishvara, Buddha of compassion. So when the boundless light of Dharmakaya, mind manifests as Dharmakaya, then the unfolding of ordinary thoughts, emotions, and so forth manifests as, in the world of form, as bliss, void, wisdom, and on a kind of higher plane, you could say. So Sambhogakaya, well, we see it said in many texts, perceivable only by Aryas, those on higher meditation states, not perceivable by ordinary human beings. So those aspects of enlightenment are the source of all enlightenment manifestations, but only perceivable to Buddhas and Arya Bodhisattvas. And for that reason, it further manifests as Nirmanakaya, in the world of ordinary form in the 6 realms. And then the 3rd line of the verse I'm quoting says, then as Nirmanakaya manifest as Padmasambhava. So that's why we see this trinity, Amitabha as Dharmakaya, Avalokitesvara as Sambhogakaya, and Padmasambhava as Nirmanakaya. As you probably know, the Tibetan name Tulku, or emanated Lama, reincarnate Lama, they borrow that word Nirmanakaya. Nirmanakaya in Tibetan is Tulku. Dharmakaya Chukku, Sambhogakaya Lunku, Nirmanakaya Tulku. So, but 1,000 or 1,200 years ago, in the Nyingma, very ancient times with the Nyingma school, they started regarding children born with special signs as being reincarnated great masters. And it sort of began unofficially with the Nyingmas. Then later with the new schools, I think many people say Karmapa was the first one where it came with property and inheritance. The child recognizes the reincarnation wasn't just his spiritual emanation, but actually owned his bank account, his yaks and temples and whatever the previous one had owned basically became the property of that child. And that property in Tibetan became known as a labrang, a Lama estate, if you will. So of course, with China destroying all but 13 of the 6,500 monasteries and temples in Tibet, all of those Tulkus who were recognized as refugees in India had no estate. So the only thing they had was the name of that Tulku, the name of that Tulku lineage. And you could now in Tibet, when I was talking to Dalai Lama, he said it was also a social stabilization factor. Every valley in Tibet had either a Gyalpo or a Jowo, either a king or a chieftain, and they would be the ones sort of taking care of the physical aspect of that kingdom, of that valley. And they would also have a Tulku who was sort of associated with that valley for many lifetimes. And so this became the basis of Sishi Zungchao, living with nirvana and samsara in balance or harmony. That basically the political side was to see that crops were successful and droughts were averted and floods and so on. Things went in a good way physically. Dalai Lama put it like this: we both have both body and mind. So someone has to take care of the body, and then someone has to take care of the mind. And in Tibet, that way of sort of balancing the body-mind well-being came about through in that kind of form. So the Tulku in a valley sometimes would have the name of that valley, or the name of that mountain, or the name of the region. And for many lifetimes, those families in that valley would think of that Lama as kind of their main spiritual anchor, if you will, or asset. And so when the refugees came to India, if there was a Tulku, and there are Tulku who died in Tibet, but if a young one was identified in India, those Tibetan refugees from that part of Tibet would be very enthusiastic, because there is their spiritual touchstone, if you will. So people sometimes walk up and circumambulate these three and then continue on their kora. Otherwise, they'll just come in here, offer prostrations, say a mantra. Many of them will know that verse, that very famous verse, Amitabha, Dharmakayas, Amitabha, Sambhoga Kayas, Shenrazi, Nirmana Kayas, Guru Padmasambhava, Pema Jungne in Tibetan. To the three kayas, I offer my salutations. Yeah, the idea when we achieve enlightenment, our mind becomes Dharmakaya. Our thoughts and feelings, our communicability, our communication, our gregariousness becomes Sambhogakaya. And our body, with its karmic connections with all things and all living beings, manifests as Nirmanakaya. So we have those three kayas within ourselves. In fact, if we practice one of the Begyu, the hidden tantras like Yamantaka, Guhya Samaja, Chakra Samvara. In the sadhana, you begin by imagining you're dying, going into clear light of death and blending with Dharmakaya. The mind becomes Dharmakaya. And then within that stillness, the utter non-movement of Dharmakaya stirs the winds of your bodhisattva determination to benefit all living beings. So you come out of the Dharmakaya manifest in a Sambhoga Kaya form, able to benefit all beings on saintly stages who are not quite there yet. Peoples like you. But then there's lots of beings out there who have not reached Arya status in their meditation. From the hells to the ghosts to the animal realms to humans and Zoras and devas and so forth, worldly devas. So then one manifests Nirmanakaya, able to emanate exactly as needed throughout all 6 realms with all beings with whom one has karmic bonds, and to bring benefit in that way. So these 3 kayas are something we all have within ourselves, connect with daily. Dalai Lama says, Tunchi Naljor, I practice my death 4 times a day. He means 4 times a day I remember clear light Dharmakaya, Bardo Sambhoga Kaya, rebirth Nirmanakaya. Om Mani Mani Mani. Om Mani Mani Mani. Om Mani Mani Mani. And whenever one visits places like this, there are always the opportunity to offer butter lamps. When with Buddhists offering light is really offering all objects of the 5 senses, offering everything in the sensory world, you could say, and dedicating that to enlightenment. Everything I have, the 7th Dalai Lama put it in a poem, see everything you own from your body and all objects of the senses as things borrowed but for a moment, to be used for your enlightenment and for the benefit of all living beings. So we see those. We also see people sitting, chanting, often monks, nuns, and so forth, yogis, yoginis. And Saga Dawa, this Buddhist holy month, and the merits are amplified thousands of times. Some say tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of times. Buddhists do sometimes exaggerate a tad, but it's very wonderful to see. And people give them small offerings. Often people come down from remote mountain kingdoms, Mustang, the Sharpa regions, Humla, and they'll spend Saga Dawa near one of the 2 stupas, and then they'll chant near the stupa, and people put down little offerings to them, and they'll use that later to get back home and probably to buy some Buddha rupas and things to take back for their village to enhance the spiritual quality of their life. So this fellow was taking a break. Now he's coming back, and soon he'll be in full force again. No. Om Mani Mani Ma Mani Yesoha. Om Mani Mani Ma Mani Yesoha. Bodhi is kind of nice because they have money changers. Not to change foreign money to money, but you can give an ordinary bill, like 1,000, which is worth about $10 or $8, and they'll break it into 10 rupee notes. Then when beggars come up, you give everyone 10 rupees. And some people will change like $100, and that's all in 10-cent piece, 10 cents notes. But you know, everyone gives you 10 cents at the end of the day. If you're a beggar, you've got a good amount of money. But out here, unfortunately, they don't have anyone doing that. And I forgot to change back at Bodhi before coming. Well, I didn't forget to come. We came at 6 o'clock in the morning, and they weren't open yet.
Normally you'd have a stack, would you?
What?
Normally you'd have a stack, would you?
Yeah, usually I change 1,000 or 2,000. And it's very nice to give out to beggars because, you know, that's what they do. That's their career, that's their lifestyle. It's nice to help them out if one can. But also in Buddhism, we say generosity unlocks the coldness of the heart. And it brings about a feeling of abundance. So Christ stole this idea from Buddhism during his 16 years of wandering in India, but he put it in it's better to give than to receive, meaning it's nicer to be a donor to a beggar than to be a beggar. And a lot of lamas, when they finish their training in a monastery, they'll wander for a year and just wander as a beggar. Because it does teach one humility and teaches one contentment, if you will, with what one has. This used to be called the monkey temple because there used to be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of monkeys here. But because monkeys in large groups become a little bit like the Bloods and the Crips in Los Angeles, very territorial, sometimes prone to violence, they had to reduce the numbers, basically cage them and carry them down to the jungles of South Nepal and release them in the wild. Probably better for the monkeys and certainly better for pilgrims. And here at Saga Dawa, you see people like that fellow. They're building a temple in some remote part of Nepal, and so they'll gather little donations and spend the month of Saga Dawa here. And if you give like $1, you get the merit of giving like $1,000, and you'll have a brick in a monastery somewhere in Nepal. During the earthquake, a lot of the border of Tibet area suffered a lot. When I brought a group here of acupuncturists about 5 years ago, just after the 15 earthquake, the mountain we were on in Yolmo, every house on the whole mountain was knocked down, and the temple, which had been on that mountain for hundreds and hundreds of years, was also knocked down. And the amazing aspect of it was the temple had 3 statues, Padmasambhava, Avalokiteshvara, and Vajrapani, made of clay, so they break very easily. But although all the walls fell down and the roof went clunk, clunk like that, somehow these 3 sacred images remained undamaged. And Padmasambhava, of course, had his 2 usual consorts, Mandarava and Yeshe Sogyal, standing to either side. And none of those, the Trinity, or if you had the 2 consorts, the 5 of them, none of those clay images were harmed. And they're all quite large, like bigger than human kind of thing. But every wall went down. Some monasteries in Tibet annually did a Kanja reading. And if you've got a large quorum of monks, like 500 or 1,000, you take 1 volume and everyone gets 10 pages. And 20 minutes later, that whole volume has been chanted. So there's the merit of the chanting, the beauty of the sounds, but at the same time, you're opening all of your volumes to see that there's no bookworms. So it's once a year, basically, they come out, and rather than just open them, shake them out and whatnot, they chant the whole series. And often in Dharamsala, they do it right in the center of the town, beside the stupa, And anyone who could read Tibetan, you could come and join, and they give you a page to chant. You become part of the reading. Oh, this is kind of interesting. You know, Tibetans love carvings on slate, and these are kind of large for traveling, but often I recommend to people going back to the West. When you see the small ones, Om Mani Padme Hum, or other images on that, people love to have them, a piece of slate from the Himalayas with a mantra carved by a carving artist. But Tibetans' favorite for carving is always Om Mani Padme Hum, the mantra of compassion. Mani, the jewel of compassion. Padme, the lotus of wisdom. Hum, brought actively or full force into one's life. And in Tibet, at the sacred places, people will buy a couple of those carvings and carry them with them and just put them in. They'll build little buildings where you can deposit them. So your private little Om Mani Padme Hum is resonating in the wind as it passes over that mountain pass. In Lhasa one year, the Chinese government outlawed any government worker for doing kora around the Jokong, Tibet's most sacred temple. But they had these smoke offering places. And of course, China has video cameras everywhere with face recognition software. But Tibetans would put on so much song in the morning that the video cameras couldn't see who was doing what. So all of the government workers could still go out and do their kora.
Why is there such an emphasis on building statues, stupas, temples?
I think in the Buddhist world, a statue is a Damsig Samba. It's a symbol of one's precept to achieve enlightenment in this lifetime, or to try. So Damsig Samba, Samya Sattva in Tibetan, in Sanskrit. So really it's a symbol of one's spiritual determination or orientation. But then after it's consecrated, the Jnana Sattva, the spirit of enlightenment, or the power of enlightenment, the energy of enlightenment, is drawn into it. So it is merely a vessel containing the power of enlightenment. So in that way, it's kind of like a window directly to enlightenment. People sit and meditate, and they'll hear it whisper and talk to them and things like that. So they're not really showing devotion to the physical material so much as to the spirit being symbolized by it, or by the powerful enlightenment energy that was called into it during the consecration of Ravne, the consecration ceremony, or the in Korea they call it the Migche, the eye-opening ceremony, where it becomes a receptacle of enlightenment nectars. The name Swayambhu means self-arisen. In other words, the mountain itself, at the time Kathmandu Valley was under a lake, the mountain itself had the shape of a traditional Indian stupa. And so therefore it's a self-arisen stupa. And later, after Nagarjuna presumably came here for the Prajnaparamita Sutras, that it became the stupa on top was built and expanded upon and has withstood earthquakes and invasions and all of that, and remains one of the most sacred places in the country. According to legend, walking up the 365 steps purifies one day from each of the past year. So obviously, I've got people who collected quite a bit of negative karma in the previous year because this is their second trip going up. They must feel they didn't completely wash it away with the first walk up. But it's just kind of a quaint kind of story, I think. Locals climb up at least once a week, but once a day they do the walk around the mountain, which we had just done. And as we go up, we'll see Buddhas of 3 times and various other spiritual sort of representations, if you will, and people doing the walk up to the Great Stūpa will pay obeisance, if you will, at their favorite of those. Oh, money. All the way up, of course, on both sides we have many stupas, and the classic Kathmandu Valley Stūpa with the Buddha eyes looking in the 4 directions. And usually under the water mandala and the gates to the mandala, we see 4 of the 5 Buddhas. And the 5th, of course, being the infinity wisdom of Dharmadhatu, doesn't necessarily have to appear in form. But otherwise, Vajrayakshobhya, Ratnasambhava, Amitabha, Amoga Siddhi, for the transformation of the skandhas of form, feeling, perceptions, and spontaneous engagement. These stupas, wherever they're placed, are supposed to remind us of the infinite radiance of the enlightened mind, looking into the 4 directions with compassion, wisdom, and power. And in olden days, every Buddhist pilgrimage site would have that kind of dharamshala building. And in olden days, you could either have a roof or you could have walls. You could not have both. And so in dry season, you have sleep in one with no roof, but there'll be wind, so walls. And in rainy season, one with roof, but no walls. And in olden days, traveling was in many pilgrimage sites. There were no hotels or guest houses. Nagarjuna wrote a letter to one of his royal disciples, a king. It's called a letter of friendly advice. But in it, he said to the king, you should build these kind of rest houses for citizens so that wherever they're traveling, if they need to sleep at night, they'll be safe and dry, and their pilgrimage will be happy and successful. But not only in pilgrimage sites, he encouraged the king to build beside roadways going all over the kingdom, so that travelers would always have a place to stay and be safe, warm, dry, and healthy. So it's very wonderful. This is the halfway spot, you could say, between the bottom of the mountain going up to Swayambhu. So they have this over there. For olden days, you could sleep here. I don't think they allow anymore because it's become a World Heritage Site, UNESCO World Heritage Site. So for security reasons, people cannot sleep, but olden days they could. And of course, then they have the beautiful benches for people to sit and meditate when you're halfway up the mountain. And we could sit and meditate, but we've already finished so much meditation today in the last 4 hours that we will just continue straight on up. The image is here on the walkway up, Buddha's past, present, future. So there is a legend in Buddhism that our period of history is called Kalpabhadra, called Kyelzangzongbo. It's auspicious eon, because we will have 5,000 fully enlightened Samyak Sambodhi Buddhas who will perform great teaching activities and set up a wave of enlightenment activity that will last 5,000 years. So 1956 was the halfway point for Buddhism, from Buddha's passing, and Nehru, on that occasion, called for a conference in India and brought Buddhist masters from all the different Buddhist countries, Thailand, Burma, Japan, of course Taiwan, China, Korea, and Tibet and Mongolia, etc. And that's the first time the Dalai Lama traveled outside of Tibet, China. He had been taken to China in 1956 without much of a request, you could say. But he was allowed to come to that conference. And according to that prophecy, the Buddha said, 2,500 years after my passing, my Dharma will go to the land of the red-faced people. I once discussed that with Dalai Lama, and he said, that means you European types. Because although you call yourself white people, we think of you as red people. Because whenever you walk fast or have a couple of drinks of alcohol or get a little bit angry or excited, you turn all red. And if the sun touches your white faces, you turn beet red. So he said the prophecy refers to Dharma going to the land of the Western Europe, Euro-Americans, you could say. And it's probably true, because in 1956 there was no Tibetan Buddhist center in the West whatsoever. And now, just 65 years later, there's almost 2,000 Tibetan Buddhist centers in the Americas, and another 1,000 or 1,500 in Europe. So obviously Dharma is going west very nicely. And naturally, you could say, some of those Dharma centers have thousands of students. Some are more modest in size, and that's just from Tibetan Buddhist side. Similarly, we have many hundreds of Zen centers around the West, many hundreds of Thai forest retreat coming from Buddha Das, the great Thai master Buddha Das, and from Uba Kim in Burma, the Goenka type of Vipassana coming through that stream. We have, again, several thousand. So that prophecy is there about the Buddhas of the three times. And our period is just over halfway through. Now, I think that what's important here is that Buddha was nobody special, in that, of course, anyone who achieves enlightenment is special, but everyone who achieves enlightenment is equal. They do differ in their karmic dharma activities, you could say. So the Buddhas of the three times, the 1,000 Buddhas of this Kalpabhadra, are all equal in enlightenment to all other Buddhas, but special in that each of the 1,000 produces a dharma enlightenment wave which lasts for thousands of years. And the previous one before us, maybe 30 or 40,000 years ago, and then some cataclysm events, things go into a little bit of a dark period, and then comes a burst of light, and Then at the end of that, it'll go into a little bit of dark period, and then another burst of light. The cycles of life on planet Earth, celebrated at this very point, on this very mountain. And we will continue up this higher hill. Now we come to the slightly steeper incline, and very auspicious with the 5 animals symbolizing the 5 main enlightenment qualities. The Garuda, with its ability to fly freely in the skies, but carrying, devouring the snakes of anger and the poisons they carry without any damage. Above that, the peacock of the lotus family. It wanders in the garden, devouring poison plants, and the more poison it eats, it transforms it into beautiful medicine, enriching the plumage of its peacock feathers. That's a famous poem by a great Indian master that came to Tibet in a text called Sunja Korlo Lojong, mind training, which is like a wheel of sharp weapons that we can. The poisons of the world need not poison us. They become medicines if we know how to use them correctly. Above that, the horse and the horse's spontaneous accomplishment of every activity. In Mongolia, often they keep herds of 25 horses with one male and the others either female or geldings. And if you get on one in the morning after it's been standing there for all night, it'll just take off and run for 10 miles spontaneously, seemingly without any effort. So on the path to enlightenment, our spontaneous engagement of all activities should be like that. Namaste Bainaji, Namaste Bhai Sabji. Up above that is the elephant. And the elephant in the Buddhist tradition symbolizes the power of deep meditation. The way the elephant walks through the forest, the mightiest of animals. Even the lion steps aside when the elephant comes through. In that way, meditation is the greatest opener of the path to enlightenment. Just very wonderful when you come to the top step and you're greeted by the 2 snow lions, male, female, and the huge, beautiful ashram, and of course the magnificent Swayambhu Stūpa behind it. Usually people arriving, they'll do 3 walk around to the main stupa. Then they'll kind of do a couple around the whole complex, like that. So we will do the same. This is always a very popular mantra and prayer offering, because for the Buddha who protects all little babies and holds back the interfering spirits that may cause a shortening of their lifespan. So moms often come here and parents, and they have little prayers and rituals done for their newborn kids. Oh, money, money, ma. Oh, money, money, ma. Oh, money, money, ma. Money, money, ma. Oh, money, money, ma.
What are you doing each time you stop at one of these alcoves?
Just saying, hello, Buddha. Again, the 5 Buddha families. The stupa represents the formless aspect of enlightenment, and that formless aspect of enlightenment transforms into the world of higher form, you could say, in terms of the 5 wisdoms, the 5 Buddha families. Early days they translate the 5 Dhyani Buddhas. There's no word for that in Tibetan. They're just called Gyawaringma in Tibetan, the 5 Jinnah families. But from the formless nature of Dharmakaya as expressed by the dome and the fire and the sky, that Dharmakaya wisdom manifests in a real way inside the world. As anger transformed to mirror-like wisdom, and narcissism transformed into the equality of self and all beings, all others, and sort of attachment to this object or that object transformed into all-penetrating awareness, and jealousy, envy, and hard work transformed into spontaneous accomplishment wisdom. And the mind is bewilderment, confusion, laziness, transforms into the utter relaxation of the Dharmata, the sphere of infinity. So those 5 Buddhas represent those 5 wisdoms, and I think when one comes in front of one shouldn't think of it like that belongs to anyone else. Those are qualities of one's own skandhas and one's own kleshas transformed into, released as enlightenment celebration, you could say. There's always a problem, I think, in every spiritual tradition of thinking how the higher mystical states or the higher wisdoms belong to special people, the saints, the prophets, and so forth. So in Buddhism, there's a big effort to try to cut off that way of instinctually following the leader, follow the leader kind of mentality. That, like Buddha said, your own savior, your own condemner, that lies in your hand. If you take charge of your life, enlightenment is yours. Or as Zangzar Khyentse put it in a very nice lecture I listened to him give, where he said, the real meaning of Buddhist refuge in Buddha Dhamma Sangha is knowing you can become Buddha, knowing you can master Dharma, knowing you can become everything that every other spiritual practitioner has ever attained. Without that, it's kind of an empty, encouraging practice, better than nothing, but it doesn't lead to enlightenment. So when you step in front of one of the 5 Buddhas, you should think, hey, am I looking in a mirror? At me? Yes! Except no beard. What to do? Maybe it's one of those trick mirrors where the beard is an AI mirror. Yeah. So I think we do one more. Part of the wonder of Swayambhu and the, you could say, everlasting mystique about it is the legends of how in ancient times in the time of the previous Buddha, not Shakyamuni, but the Buddha before him, and also before him, Dipankara and Kashyapa, those two great Buddhas, 2 and 3 in the list of 4 so far. They also visited, meditated on this great mountain. And then, of course, Buddha prophesied that 450 years after his passing, a man would come from the south, very accomplished and blessed by the Nagas, which referred to Nagarjuna, would come and would find his prajna paramita, his deepest teaching, and widely promulgate them, leading to the second wave of enlightenment. So that's tied to this mountain. Buddha taught the prajna paramita to Manjusri, who brought them to this part of the world, and they were held here until Nagarjuna's time, and then Nagarjuna visited. Now, according to the story, when this was under a lake, those mountains held the lake, and Manjusri uttered some mantras, and a crack appeared in the southeast side, allowing some of the water to drain out. And as it drained out more and more, then more and more land came, and this hill became bigger and bigger. But near where that cut was made by the mantra power of Manjusri, there's a cave entrance that goes down under the earth, and under the whole lake, which was this valley, there's a whole series of caves, just underground caves, that come right under here. And so that leads to the third great legend. When Buddha was ready to pass away, he said, the only thing is we produce the right number of enlightened beings, arhants and so forth, but I'm afraid 16 of you are going to have to stay on the planet until Maitreya. And so you will be the emanating arhants, the 16 emanating arhants. And he gave each one of the mountains on planet Earth as his mountain, and those 16 went into their areas. And under this is one of those emanating arhants. And if you want to find, you can go through under the stalagmites, but a lot of people have tried, but it's very easy to get lost down there, or perhaps you just get down there and decide not to come back and stay down there for a long time to come. But this mountain, therefore, is tied with previous Buddhas, tied with Buddha Shakyamuni, tied with the great Nagarjuna and the whole wave of Mahayana. So it's considered one of the most sacred mountains in the Buddhist world, certainly in the Himalayas. So when we walk here, we're walking where many great masters for the last 5,000 years have walked. And our dust collects the blessings of those masters on our bottom of our shoes. And when you get home, you should enshrine your shoes in some sort of museum quality display case and pray to those specks of dust underneath the soles. Don't wash them, please. Yeah. So it's a beautiful place behind, and maybe why don't you come, Steve, here, and you can take a photo of us together.
Thank you for listening to another Guru Viking podcast. For more interviews like these, as well as articles, videos, and guided meditations, visit www.guruviking.com.